Guy Wire by Sarah Weeks. Chapter 2. I didn't even see him. He came out of nowhere, the man said, as he got out of his car and came over to Buzz, who was lying in the street. He's not, is he? I almost didn't recognize the sound of my own voice. It was so small and pinched, like something was trying to squeeze my throat closed. The man leaned over Buzz and touched his neck. He's breathing and his pulse seems okay, he said as he took off his jacket, and he laid it gently over Buzz's still body. But he's not conscious, and that's never a good thing. Somebody must have called an ambulance. The police came too. I remember answering questions, but mostly I just sat on the ground next to Buzz, touching his arm and talking to him softly. Then a wonderful thought came into my head. I bent close to his ear and I whispered, "Okay, I get it now. I know what you're doing, wee worm. You're lying there, pretending to be out of it so you can pop up and scare the heck out of me, aren't you? Go ahead, Buzz, pop up and get it over with. Make a fool out of me and then laugh your head off about it. I won't mind, I promise, really. Go ahead, open your eyes, Buzz. Come on." But he didn't pop up, and he didn't laugh or smile or open his eyes, and it was all my fault, and I should have never told him about my wish. They wouldn't let me ride in the ambulance with him. I watched them put him on a stretcher and lift him onto the back, and then they drove off toward the hospital. I rode my bike the rest of the way home, dropped it in the driveway, and ran into the house to tell my mother what had happened. "You boys are in luck. Snickerdoodles are just coming out of the oven," my mother called as I came in the back door. "Buzzy, I made a double batch because I knew you were Mom," I said. My mother turned around and her face changed the minute she laid eyes on me. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting her pot holder down on the counter and ignoring the timer when it dinged. "It's Buzz," I said. "They just took him away in an ambulance." Oh my God, what happened?" my mother cried. Tears began streaming down my face. "He got hit by a car, Mom. Somebody hit Buzz." "Is he okay, Guy?" she asked anxiously. "I don't know," I said, and the words echoed through the empty space that seemed to have taken over the whole left side of my chest. My mother called Buzz's mom, and she was on the phone for only a second. Then she rushed, turning off the oven, getting her car keys, putting on her jacket, and writing a note for my stepfather, Jerry. "I'm going to drive Barbara over to the hospital," she told me, starting for the door. "Buzz's dad is going to meet us there." "I'm coming too." "Are you sure you want to?" she asked. I just looked at her. "Of course you do," she said quietly. Barbara Adams was already standing out on the curb at the bottom of our driveway. My mom's house, where I live half of the time since she and my dad are divorced or split time with me, is right next door to Buzz's. She and Jerry bought the house when they decided to get married last spring. Jerry's semi-obnoxious daughter, Lana, also lives with us part of the time, but at the moment she was in California with her own mom. Miss Adams put her purse over her shoulder and she was wearing an apron on her dress. It was pink and frilly and it said, "Kiss me, I'm cooking" on it. Buzz and I had gone shopping together and each bought one for our moms for Mother's Day a few years ago. My mom still wore hers too, but she had used whiteout and a permanent marker to change hers to say, "Kiss me, I'm kooky." "Mom," I said, "do you think we should tell her she's still got her apron on?" My mother looked at me and silently shook her head as Mrs. Adams opened the car door and quickly got in. "Barbara, I'm so sorry," Mom said, reaching over and touching her shoulder. "Lorraine, I'm not even going to let myself think." Buzz's mom closed her eyes and pressed her lips together so tight that they turned white. A few seconds later, she turned around and took my hand and squeezed it. I shivered. Her fingers were like ice. Hal Adams was waiting at the hospital when we got there. He and Buzz's mom were allowed to go in right away, but my mom and I had to wait out in the waiting room. "Why can't we go in too?" I asked. "Only families allowed in right now," my mother explained gently. "Don't best friends count as family?" I asked. My mother just patted my knee. We sat down next to each other in a couple of gray plastic chairs. There was a large clock hanging on the wall with a large white face and a sweeping red second hand. I watched it go all the way around once. It was 2:37. A table nearby held a few magazines that looked like 1,000,000 people had read them already. I pictured those 1,000,000 people licking their 1,000,000 spitty thumbs as they turned those pages again and again, and I felt sick to my stomach. My mother reached for a magazine with a picture of a big pie on the cover. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I looked at the clock. It was 2:38. "Can't somebody come out and tell us what's happening?" I asked. "I'm sure as anybody knows anything, they'll come and tell us, Guysy," my mom said, closing the magazine and putting it back on the table. "I know you're worried." "Worried? No, that's too small a word to describe how I feel. You don't understand, Mom. You weren't there. You didn't see him. It was like he was Buzz, only he wasn't Buzz." "I know, baby, I know." Her consoling didn't help. It just made me mad. "No, you don't know," I yelled, suddenly standing up facing her. "Don't say you know when you can't possibly know. Is he your best friend? Did you see him lying there not moving? Are you the one who couldn't bring myself to say the horrible thing that ached and burned guiltily inside of me. Are you the one whose fault it is that Buzz got hurt? I guess you're right, Guy. I can't know how you feel, but I love Buzzy too. You know that. He's like one of the family. I don't know what I'd do if anything happened to him. She pinched the bridge of her nose. She always does that when she's about to cry. I felt bad that I'd yelled at her like that. It's true, my mom does love Buzz, and she always has. I'm sorry, I said softly as I sat down next to her. She put her arm around me, and I rested my head on her shoulder. What if he's not okay? I asked. We can't think that way, Guysie, she said, sitting up straight and wiping her eyes and nose with a crumpled tissue she pulled out of her pocket. No, we have to think positive. That's all there is to it. Positive about what? I asked. About Buzz, my mother answered. Instead of imagining the worst, we have to visualize the best. What are you talking about? I asked. Just the other day, I was reading an article about how positive psychic energy has remarkable healing effects on the human body. She said, it was fascinating. Mom, this isn't going to turn into one of your lectures about how blue food coloring and television commercials stunt your growth, is it? I said. Of course not. I'm just saying that a lot of people believe that creating a positive aura around someone who's sick can help make them better. Okay. I hate when my mother starts spouting out stuff like auras. We could try it, she said. I mean, it couldn't hurt, right? I shrugged. They made it sound pretty easy. All you have to do is thinking about something positive for the person. For instance, right now I'm going to think about the look on Buzz's face when he bites into a warm snickerdoodle. Can you picture that? She asked. Of course I could picture it. I'd seen him do it 12 million times, but I wasn't the least bit convinced it was going to do anything good to sit there and picture Buzz eating cookies at a time like this. I can see him clear as day with a huge smile on his face and a big cookie in his hand, my mother went on. Now he's smiling at me and saying, "All reedy beg zeedy." I quietly finished the sentence for her. Buzz always says that when he's happy about something. Exactly, my mother said. See? Not really, I said. How do you know if it's working? Should something happen? You have to put your faith in the idea that somehow your thoughts are going to reach Buzzy and make a difference. Then positive cosmic energy will search high and low for him, and when it finds him, it'll wind around and around his spirit, and that will help him to heal. I stopped listening. I knew she meant well, but I have about zero tolerance for my mom's new age junk. How do you wind a positive thought around someone anyway? All I could picture was Buzz tangled up in a yo-yo string. At least I'll give it a try, Guysie. It can't hurt. Besides, it's better than just sitting here worrying. Come on. Think about Buzz. Maybe some great time you had in the old fort or at camp or school. You guys have had a million terrific times together. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Buzz. I sure had looked at his silly old freckled face enough to have it memorized, but for some reason the first thing I pictured wasn't his face. It was his left sneaker. Why? And then I remembered one of his shoes must have come off when the car hit him. I seen it lying on its side in the gutter with the laces still tied. A few feet away from Buzz was lying on the pavement. As I pictured the empty shoe, I heard my own ridiculously happy voice coming back to me as I shouted to Buzz, "That's it, gumball, prepare to die." The horrible relevance of those words made me sit up with a jolt. What's the matter? My mother asked. I'm trying to think of positive stuff, but it's not working, I explained. Still shaken by the image of that sneaker and the memory of those fateful words, prepare to die. How could I have said that? I didn't mean it. My mother put her arm around me, and I leaned against her. Think back to the very beginning, Guy, when Buzzy first came to town. Do you remember that? She said. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we were kind of talking about that right before I felt my chest tighten. Try not to think about the present, honey bunch. Go back to the beginning, the very first time you and Buzzy met each other. What a lucky thing that turned out to be, huh? I closed my eyes and let myself travel back in time. Memories spun and spun out of focus, clicking into place like a slideshow. My mom was right. Meeting Buzz had turned out to be a lucky thing. The luckiest, but it hadn't started out that way. Chapter 3. The summer before second grade started, I turned 7, and when I blew out the candles on my cake, I made the exact same wish I'd made the year before. And the year before that, too. I wanted a best friend more than anything in the world. Lana Zuckerman had Autumn Hockney, Max Lamont had Frankie Arches, even Barry Madison, who was creepy and had a rotten front tooth, had a best friend. But I'd never had one, not ever. I was pretty sure there was nothing wrong with me. People seemed to think I was perfectly likable, a regular kind of kid, despite the fact that both of my parents were notoriously weird. So I figured that finding a best friend had more to do with luck, and that, for some reason, I was just unlucky. My second grade teacher was named Miss Hunn. She was pretty nice and hardly ever yelled at us unless we did something really bad, like throwing wet paper towel balls on the bathroom ceiling. She had a neat stuff on her desk. She didn't mind if we looked as long as we didn't touch it. There was a framed picture of her water skiing with her husband in Florida, a statue of the Empire State Building that had a thermometer in it that really worked, and a little glass bell which she rang whenever she had an announcement to make to class. I remember one day in the fall of that year, it must have been October because I think we were making jack-o'-lanterns out of construction paper. Miss Hunn rang her bell, and when I looked up, she was standing in front of her desk with her arm around this boy I'd never seen before. I knew right away that this new kid she'd been telling us was going to join our class, and my heart sank. I'd kind of been hoping that my luck might change and he would turn out to be potential best friend material, but that was obviously not going to be the case. First of all, instead of jeans and a t-shirt, which is what all the rest of us boys had on, he was wearing a suit, a little blue jacket with matching pants, a bright white shirt, and a red and white striped tie with a tiny tie pin, shaped like a horseshoe, stuck in it, holding it down flat against his shirt front. His shoes were the lace-up kind, and they were two-tone brown on the toes and heels and whites on the sides. He had a white handkerchief sticking out of his jacket pocket. I repeat, a handkerchief. His pale face was splattered with a fistful of muddy freckles, and it was hard to tell what color his hair was because it was parted in the middle and flattened down on his head like a dark, wet helmet. Class, this is our new student, Fenimore Adams. There was a total silence. Then Kevin Brudhauser, the official class bully, spoke up. What planet are you from? He asked, grinning and looking around for approval as some of the other kids laughed. Fenimore comes to us all the way from Tennessee, Kevin, she said, giving Kev such an evil eye that it wiped all the mean smile right from his face. From a town called... She hesitated as she tried to remember the name. The boy popped up. Pigeon Forge, ma'am. It's south of Knoxville, a piece. When he spoke, a couple of the kids snickered because he had a thick southern accent that made his words sound strange and twangy. Miss Hunn went on to say that the usual stuff about how she expected us all to give him a warm Cedar Springs welcome and show him the ropes until he's comfortable in his new surroundings. I just kept looking at that candy cane striped tie and those shoes and thinking, it's a good thing geekiness isn't contagious because this kid could be fatal. Guy, I would like you to be Fenimore's lunch buddy today, Miss Hunn said. Oh man, I groaned to myself. Why me? Then she turned to Fenimore and asked, did you bring lunch from home, dear, or will you be wanting a hot lunch today? My mama packed a lunch for me today. Thank you kindly, ma'am. His mama? Ma'am? Why did I have to be his lunch buddy? Couldn't somebody else do it? It was bad enough that my mother packed me the weirdest lunches in the whole world. Now I had to eat my weird lunch with the weird new kid. When the lunch bell rang, I shuffled slowly over to Fenimore's desk and waited while he put his binder and spelling book away. Come on, I said. When he was finally ready, I led him down the hall to the cafeteria, walking a little in front of him, just so nobody would get the wrong idea and think we were friends. This cafeteria smells exactly like the one back in Pigeon Forge, he said, when we walked through the doors. Uh-huh, I said without looking at him. Want to hear my theory, he asked. I shrugged. I think there's a huge underground cave somewhere full of lady robots with hairnets and big moles on their chins. And they programmed them to mix up giant vats of disgusting stuff, like barbecued beef, and pour it into big barrels. Then they load the barrels onto planes and drop them out of the sky like beef bombs into the cafeteria all across the country. I laughed. Even though it was hard to look at Fenimore in that ridiculous suit and feel anything other than pity for him, I had to admit those barbecue beef bombs were pretty funny. I don't eat hot lunch, I said. My mother packs mine. Mine too, he said, with a smile holding up his blue lunchbox. We sat down at the table near the door and put our lunchboxes out on the table in front of us. I watched as Fenimore opened his. He pulled out a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into 2 neat triangles, a box of apple juice, and a banana. I always used to trade with my best friend George back in Pigeon Forge, he said. Oh, I said, but I didn't open my box. I was thinking about 2 things. 1, I was trying to imagine what George was like. Probably some polite little nerd in a dorky suit. And 2, I was trying to avoid to show Fenimore what was in my lunchbox. Do you like to trade, he asked, leaning over toward me and reaching for my lunchbox. Let's see what we got. No, I said, putting both hands on the box and sliding it quickly over to the edge of the table where I held it tight against my chest. No problem, he said. Some people don't like swapping. George always said my lunch was too boring to trade anyway. You probably got something way more interesting than PBJ, huh? Maybe, I said, knowing full well that whatever my mother had packed was guaranteed to scoot right past interesting and directly into the category of totally bizarre. Fenimore unwrapped his sandwich and bit off the soft point on one of the triangles, and he smiled at me as he chewed. But I looked away. He seemed nice enough, and he had made me laugh with his lunch lady robot theory, but there was no getting around the fact that Fenimore was a dork, and the helmet hair alone was clear proof of that. And I wasn't about to befriend a dork. Life was hard enough as it was. Listen, I said suddenly, now that you know where the cafeteria is and everything, you don't mind if I leave you here and go outside, do you? I sometimes like to play basketball during lunch with my friends when the weather's nice, so I'm going to go now, okay? Oh, sure, okay, he said. He sounded a little disappointed, but how sorry could I feel for him? After all, he had a normal lunch in his lunchbox and a best friend back home. He was pretty lucky. Me, I didn't even want to think about the ridiculous thing my mother had packed for lunch. And it was depressing to think that even someone who had a silly name and walked around dressed up the way he did could have a best friend when I didn't have one. See you later, I said, as I picked up my lunchbox. Okay, he said. When I got outside, I found a bench far away from the basketball court and opened my lunchbox. As soon as I saw the contents, I was glad I decided not